Hey, good morning, fourth grade class at Holcomb. It's Jerry Moran in Washington, D.C. Great to be with you this morning. I understand that you had a conversation with Representative Hulskamp, and I'm honored as your senator to have a conversation with you as well. I've been to Holcomb many times, and I've been to the high school, although I can't ever remember being at the elementary school. So I'm glad to at least be able to connect with you using Skype from Washington, D.C. I'm just a few feet away from the United States Capitol, and it's just right next door, and I am anxious to have a conversation with all of you. I appreciate Ms. Seibel allowing me to visit her fourth grade class. My fourth grade teacher was my favorite, Mrs. Pruder, and fourth grade was my favorite class of all the time I've been in school. I assume you all like fourth grade, right? Yeah. Way to go, Ms. Seibel. It seems like you've done very well. And I also understand maybe the principal and superintendent are there, and very much appreciate them joining us today. I live in Hays, Kansas, not that far from Holcomb, and come to Washington, D.C. every week. So I drive to an airport, sometimes Wichita, sometimes Kansas City, every once in a while Denver, and get on an airplane and fly to Washington, D.C. and spend my week here. And then on Friday, I fly back to Kansas and come back to Hays. And I spend lots of time in schools and visiting with businesses and talking to people across Kansas. I'm probably in 30 or 40 schools a year. Sometimes it's third and fourth grade classes talking about the importance of reading. And often it's a high school government class talking about what's going on in Washington, D.C. But my understanding is that you all, Mrs. Seibel, that you all have questions for me, and I'm glad to take the questions unless you have something you want to tell me, Ms. Seibel.
No, we have been studying government, and we have read about you, and we read about the Senate. So some of the questions that they have deal directly with the Senate, and they want to kind of know what it's about and how you make laws.
Okay, very good.
Okay, my first question is from Lexus.
What was the first day of Senate like?
Lexus, I think I understood your question, which was, what was the first day of the Senate like?
Yes.
The first day of the Senate, I have two daughters, and while they used to be fourth graders, they're now K-State college students, and they both came back here with me along with my wife. And the first day of being a senator was being sworn in, taking an oath, putting my hand on a Bible and raising my other hand and promising to do my job. And that oath was administered by the Vice President of the United States. His name is Biden, Vice President Biden. And then we had lots of Kansans who came to watch that, and we had a reception that day. The Senate adopted some of its rules so that we could know how to behave for the rest of the year. But the first day was a ceremonial day. And I would tell you it was a real honor to be sworn in, to raise my hand and promise to do my job as a United States Senator, in the sense that I'm what I would say a pretty small town Kansas kid who grew up liking politics and government and history and biographies. The things I read when I was your age were things about Washington, D.C. and things about the world. But there's nothing in my life that would ever suggest that I grew up to be a member of the United States Senate, other than we live in a country in which each one of you can pursue your dreams and ultimately you may become whatever you want to be. And so it was a real privilege to be here on that first day of the United States Senate, ready to go to work and to promise to do my job as best I know how, and to have my daughters and wife and friends here to watch that happen. My understanding is that many of you have been to Washington, D.C.
We have an Odyssey of the Minds here in Holcomb, and they actually went to Worlds this year. 2 teams did from Holcomb Elementary to Washington, D.C. So.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much for your question.
Where does your family live while you are in Washington, D.C.?
Well, my family, before I was a member of the United States Senate, I represented the people of Holcomb in the House of Representatives, just like Congressman like Representative Hulskamp. And I did that for 14 years. And when I was first elected 15 years ago, our daughters were 6 and 8. And we made the decision that we did not want to move to Washington, D.C., and we didn't want them to go to school here. We very much believe we have great schools in Kansas. We have great teachers. And we certainly felt that way about our school and our teachers in Hays. And so we decided we're not moving to Washington, D.C., and so my family, the whole time that I've worked here, has lived in Kansas. And so my kids started kindergarten in Hays and graduated from high school there. And as far as where they live now, we continue to live in Hays, and that's what I was saying a little bit earlier about coming back home to Hays every weekend. And our daughters have now grown up. One is still at K-State trying to become a veterinarian, and the other one has just graduated and getting ready to go to graduate school. So, and my wife lives in Hays, where she has worked at the high school playing the piano for the music department. So we live a pretty normal life in Kansas. It's just that dad and husband spends a lot of time driving to an airport, a lot of time on an airplane, but home is Hays. And so when I go to the grocery store, I don't go to the grocery store in Washington, D.C., I go to the grocery store in Kansas. When we go to church in Kansas. When we go to the post office, it's the local post office, it's not Washington, D.C. And I think it's one of the things that helps me stay focused on what Kansans care the most about. And it's why I visit schools, for example, is to make sure I understand what's going on in classrooms across our state and what I ought to be doing as a member of the Senate to make sure that you all have quality education. But our home is in Kansas, and I'll be there every weekend. My hometown is a town smaller than Hays. It's called Plainville, and that's where my parents live. It's where I grew up. I went to kindergarten and high school, and it's just about 25 miles away from Hays. And so I make it home to Plainville also every weekend to see my dad. So home is Kansas. And I didn't hear your name.
His name was Jackson.
Jackson, thank you very much for your question.
What has been your biggest accomplishment so far?
What's your biggest accomplishment so far?
Well, I've only been in the Senate for about 9 months, but I did, as I said earlier, I served as Tim Hulskamp does now in the House of Representatives. And sometimes when people say, what's the best thing you've ever done? What's the greatest thing you ever accomplished? I think they often think about some bill, something becoming law, some major accomplishment in Congress. And I would say that the most satisfaction I get from my job, yeah, there's been some things that we've passed into law, changed the law of our country. But mostly this job gives me a chance to try to make a difference in people's lives. And we have Kansans who call me all the time with some kind of problem, something that's going on in their life, some circumstance with government, and they need our help. And so I would say our greatest accomplishment are the number of times that we've been able to help a Kansan solve a problem. And sometimes it's somebody who needs a job. We've tried to help people do that, although that's not our primary responsibility. Sometimes it's a person who needs to have an operation, or somebody in their family is sick and they need help and they can't afford it. So while we often think about Congress as the big picture of laws we pass, I would say that it's more one-on-one, the opportunity to try to help somebody who's got something going wrong in their life and they're trying to figure out how to solve that problem. And that's the satisfaction, kind of the biggest thing I get to do is at least try to make a difference in an individual's life or a family or a community. We got lots of problems going on in our country, and I would say that the greatest opportunity we have is to try to make sure that each one of you have the chance to live a great life. And so that's the satisfaction. It's not accomplished yet, but trying, that's the part that I like. And thank you for your question.
My name is Caitlin.
Hi, Caitlin.
What has been your biggest challenge?
What's the biggest challenge? Well, just on a personal level, the challenge would be being away from my family, being gone so much from my daughters, especially when they were growing up away from my wife. So just personally, that's kind of the downside of this job, is that I'm gone a lot. As much as I try to be home, and I'm home every weekend, but as much as I try to be home for when my kids were in school for their things, I missed some of those opportunities to be a better dad. And so that's kind of the downside of the way we live our life. And then it becomes how difficult it is to get the country to agree. There are 435 members of the House of Representatives, people who do what Tim Hulskamp does, and there's 100 of us, and then there's President Obama. And before a bill can become law, before we can change the laws of our country, we have to get most of those people to agree. And people come from all over the country with different ideas, and they represent different kind of places. They think differently sometimes than we do. And there's Republicans and Democrats, there's conservatives and liberals, and trying to get everybody to, at least a majority of folks, to reach an agreement about what we ought to do in the direction of taking the country in a certain direction. That's probably the biggest challenge of the job, is trying to make sure that we figure out how we can get along well enough, work together, and get something done in our nation's capital for the people of our country. My guess is in your class at Holcomb Elementary, everybody doesn't always agree about everything, about what game to play at recess, or what you're going to do for the day. And yet somehow we figure out how to make decisions and get things done. And so that's a big challenge here in Washington, D.C., especially right now. And thank you for your question.
My name is Braden.
Hi, Braden.
We read that only the Senate can approve or reject treaties and presidential nominations for government offices. Have you ever approved or rejected a treaty or presidential nomination?
There are a couple of things. Our country is the people who founded our country created a constitution, and that constitution outlines how our government works. It also determines what the rights of the American people are. And a couple of things are different about the United States Senate than the House of Representatives. And you mentioned two of them. We get to confirm judges and presidential appointments. So if President Obama wants somebody to work in his cabinet, to be the Secretary of Agriculture, for example, we get to vote whether or not that person gets that job. And yes, I have voted to confirm most of the appointments, and every once in a while I voted not to confirm an appointment. And so we get the opportunity to say yes or no based upon what I believe is that person's qualifications. And we've had a couple of votes related to treaties, and those don't happen very often. But there's a talk about another treaty coming before the Senate, and this one is very controversial. It takes 2/3, so 2 out of every 3 senators, and there's 100 senators, so 67 senators have to say yes to agreeing to the person being appointed to the job or approving a treaty. And so it doesn't just take a majority, it takes a supermajority, 2/3, to get that done. So every once in a while we have the opportunity to cast those votes, mostly related to judges and to appointments, and every once in a while related to a treaty. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cade. Majority and minority leaders of the Senate.
I didn't hear exactly what you said other than minority leaders and majority leaders.
Have you met them?
Oh, have I met them? Yes, I have met both the majority leader and the minority leader. And they're very nice to me, and we have nice conversations. And I see the minority leader certainly every day and have a conversation most days. And I often see the majority leader, and every once in a while we have a conversation. In fact, the majority leader asked me the question that was the first one that was asked me by all of you today is, how do you like your job? How are things going now that you're in the Senate? And so sometimes it's very serious conversations, and sometimes it's just a couple of friends having a conversation about what's going on in their lives. You know, you all keep asking me questions. What's going on in Holcomb? How are things in your school? Things are good? And are you learning a lot? Yes. And your favorite subjects?
Math.
I don't know that I heard what everybody said, but it sounded like it was math.
We have a lot of math and science, it sounded like in here.
That is very good, and my thought was that's unusual, but we really do need people who understand math and science. Those are very important subjects. Washington, D.C. doesn't have a lot to do with education. Most of the decisions that are made about what goes on in your school are not made here in our nation's capital. They're made in Topeka with our state legislature and our governor, and they're made with a board of education, people in Holcomb who decide about what goes on in your school, and who give direction to your school superintendent, who has the opportunity to tell me then if there's things that I ought to be doing in Washington, D.C. But at the moment, there is a lot of discussion about education law called No Child Left Behind. And that has an impact upon what goes on in our classrooms. And I don't know whether your teacher will agree with me or not, and I don't know about your superintendent or principal, but when I was in the House of Representatives, I had the chance to vote on No Child Left Behind, and voted against it, not because we want to leave any child behind, but because every child is different and all 99% of us are not the same. And I want to make sure that every child has the chance to improve, not that we meet some standard. I also think you may like this, you may agree with me, students, I think you take too many tests. Yeah.
We test a lot. Okay, thank you, Senator.
You are very welcome. Thank you for what's going on in Holcomb in the classroom. I believe that while what goes on in Washington, D.C. is important, and I hope that you all will pay attention, and when you become 18, that you become voters, and you write your congressman and your senators letters, and you tell me what you think ought to be done. And maybe some of you will grow up someday to be a senator or a congressman or even president of the United States, and all that's good. But I would ask you to pay great respect to Ms. Seibel. Teachers matter. In my view, we change the world one person at a time, and teachers do that every day in classrooms across Kansas. And so I hope you treat your teachers with great respect, and I wish you well and hope that you learn a lot. And I'll do my part to see that you have the chance to grow up and live the American dream. And it's a real honor to be with the Holcomb Elementary School in the 4th grade classes this morning. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you sometime in person, okay? All right.
Thank you, Senator.
You are very welcome. Bye-bye.